Hey everybody, Dave Lindbergh in Hong Kong with a new episode of the THD Podcast. Today is episode 99, so in honor of that, we're going to put on a special Canadian guest. If you know that joke, then you're in the loop. And it's Dr. Sean Olive, and he's going to come and talk about the Harman Target Curve for us today. But without delay, let's give a thanks to our sponsor, the Alti Association. We encourage everybody to go check out Barry Vogel's organization and get involved, the great networking and industry association for technology and brands alike. So without delay, let's get into the podcast.
Simon Weston in Japan, coming on
Hi,
almost lunchtime. How you doing, Simon?
very good.
All
Should be a good
right.
one.
And Sean in California, probably not too far from Northridge, but I'm just guessing. How you doing
Yeah,
today, sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Good. All right. So yeah, the Harman curve, I mean, just from my layman point of view, I could see it's to me as a on the manufacturing side of things, it's kind of an attempt to add some kind of standardization to a wide breadth of products because you know you're building earbuds, headphones, all kinds of different things. And how do you introduce some kind of standardization to that so there's a perhaps a consistent Harman sound? But maybe this goes beyond just Harman and trying to create a bit of an industry standard. I've seen a lot of communication on the target curve to a lot of AES type audiences. And so maybe that's kind of my rough prediction of what it is, but perhaps you can dig into it and tell us exactly what you've accomplished here.
Sure. Yeah, that's a fairly accurate summary of what it is. I mean, it didn't start out as something we wanted that we presented as this is the final say on what sounds good. The industry sort of grabbed hold of it because I think there was a real desire to have something, have a reference or have a standard that was different than the current standard, which was a 1993 standard based on the diffuse field target. So that's basically what happened. And the difference, I think, there's been research done on headphone targets in the past, but all of our research from 2012 to 2018 has been published as mostly AES papers.
Hmm.
And so all this information is publicly available if you're an AES member. And I think over those 6 years, we published 16 papers, two different book chapters, a bunch of patents, and a kind of a model that takes the measurements and predicts how it would score in a listening test. So there's a fair amount of science behind it, which in our industry is kind of unusual.
Hmm. Okay.
Um,
Let's jump into a presentation and walk people through this then.
sure. So yeah, it started in 2012. It was a team of myself, Todd Welty, Elizabeth McMullen joined the team, and then she left, and then we had another co-author, Omid Kansorpur, uh, who's left Harman since. He's now at
Is
another
that
headphone company,
HyperX, I believe?
HyperX. That's right.
Yeah.
S-
The small world.
So, some of our research has, filtered out into other companies, but the good sound is not something you can patent or protect really. And our objective all along was to try to share what we learned with the industry and sort of, raise the standard. So it started out kind of informally. We started to, we could see that headphones were taking off in the industry, and it was largely being driven by the iPod, the iPhone, portable devices. So people were
Hmm.
hooking up headphones to them. And we started listening to them, measuring them, and we realized that they're all over the map. Even
Okay.
within a brand, different models sounded different. So yeah, so the work started in 2012, and as I said, uh, we were observing that the headphones were all over the map, and we looked into the standards, and we realized that no one was really following them, and that they were actually quite old, and there wasn't a lot of research or listening test data to back some of the curves we were seeing. So we started off with this notion that maybe headphones should sort of replicate the in-room response of a good loudspeaker, because that's how most recordings are mixed and optimized to sound good over good speakers in a room. So we started off going into our reference listening room with some neutral speakers, some JBL studio monitors. We also tried some Revel Performa speakers. Basically, these are anechoically flat neutral speakers. Mm-hmm. And we took our test coupler, which at that time was a 711 coupler made by Grass. We flush mounted it in a styrofoam head, and we measured each speaker. Initially, we measured a stereo setup and then a 7.1, and more recently, I've measured 19 speakers in an immersive format. So we've gone from 2 to 19 speakers plus 4 subs. But so we measured at the eardrum what the average response was at the listening position, and that sort of became the baseline of what our target was. We did some spatial averaging, we did some smoothing, but essentially what we had was the in-room response of a speaker that's been calibrated in the room. And then we went from there and we said, well, we're not certain what the exact bass and treble levels should be. So we did some experiments where we had people adjust the bass and treble. And we initially started this with over-ear headphones, and then we did a study on in-ear headphones, and we found that people actually preferred 4 dB more bass than the over-ear and slightly more treble. And as I said, they were both defined on the Grass test fixture, which at that time was the best average of what a human ear canal was, and the pinna as well in the head. Mm-hmm. And more recently, we've started to look at how these headphones measure on a more modern standard, the type 4.3, for example, the HATS 5128. Mm-hmm. So you can see here the green curve is what the current over-ear on-ear target is for when you measure it on a Grass 45CA ear simulator.
Do you mind if I ask a couple of things? So you mentioned modify the bass and treble. In the low frequency, would it be essentially flat if it wasn't modified? Is that kind of like the 4 dB that we're seeing between -45 to -30?
Yeah, it's basically we've added a bass shelf, and originally we equalized the speaker in the room to have a flat in-room steady state response. So we know from tests that we've done on speakers that sounds too thin and too bright. So we had to make modifications, and it turns out that the curve is very similar to a speaker that's anechoically flat, but when you put it in a room, there's a bit of bass lift, and you're measuring some combination of the direct sound and the sound power. So it looks very similar. So essentially, what people are hearing in a headphone is what the spectrum would be if they were in a room listening to a speaker.
And you mentioned people preferred 4 dB. When you say preferred, you mean that sounded more natural or more a better match to loudspeakers, or it's just like more? It's not that too, just like more bass, right?
Yeah, on average, they preferred. They would also adjust the bass. I think I have a slide that shows this, but if you put a speaker that was flat in the bass in a room, they would adjust the bass of the speaker upwards as well, and they would turn the treble down. So whether it's a speaker or a headphone, they like to have that shape of curve. Mm-hmm. But as we're going to find out, it somewhat depends on the individual, and we've looked into demographic factors and those sorts of things, and there are some variances around this curve. This curve, it won't satisfy everyone, but on average, it satisfies most people. So here's the graph. The green dotted curve is the speaker that's been the steady state response in a room of a speaker that's anechoically flat, but has been equalized at the listening position so that the bass is flat and the treble has been turned up a little bit so it's also flat. The black curve is our first iteration of the headphone after people had done adjustments, and then we did a much larger study, and the bass came up a little bit because this included a lot of non-trained listeners. But you can see, you can see that there's a fairly close approximation to the speaker measured in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first, so this is the test fixture we used. It's still manufactured today. It has a more modern coupler in it that goes up to 20 kilohertz. And the pinna that you can see on the side, these aren't standard pinna. These are pinna that Todd Welty developed to better simulate leakage measured on humans. Because when we initially bought this fixture, the ears were very stiff. And they actually stuck out. You can see here on the right, this was the original grass pinna, and it was really designed for a hearing aid to fit behind the ear. While it may be good for hearing aids, it's not so great for measuring circumaural headphones where you want to get a good seal. So what Todd did was a large study where he took some headphones and he measured them. He measured a bunch of headphones on different people. So he had a measure of the average leakage, and then he took the grass pinna, he made a reverse mold of it, and he modified it until he changed the hardness, he changed the shape slightly until when he measured the same headphones on this artificial pinna, it matched what he was measuring on humans. So it didn't leak as much, and it provided a better seal. And since he did this study, Grass has come out with their current pinna is much more soft. It's softer, it's very pliable, and you can put a headphone on and it sort of collapses so that you get a good seal.
Okay.
So yeah, so this is the more modern version of it. This is what I have at home. And what I use to measure most of the headphones until recently. I'm now using a B&K 5128. So we came up with this baseline, and then we did a lot of measurements or listening tests where people modified the bass and treble, and then we had to do a validation where we compared it against other targets as well as some well-known references in the audio field. So the first thing I did was we needed to come up with a method where we could do a blind test. At this time, this was around 2012, 13, the most popular headphone in the marketplace was a Beats Studio. And there was a lot of debate why it was popular. Was it because of the marketing? Was it because of the sound? And of course, our marketing people said, we believe it's the sound. And the engineer said, no, we think it's the marketing. We don't think it's because of the sound. So how do you separate the marketing from the sound? You have to come up with a blind test. So we came up with this method where we could take headphones, measure them on this grass coupler, capture the frequency response, and then take a standard headphone and equalize it so it matches the response of these different headphones, including the Beats. So it doesn't simulate the distortion or perhaps the spatial aspects, but it pretty well approximates the frequency response. And it's also another way of controlling leakage. So we're not necessarily simulating leakage effects of different headphones, but we're actually trying to minimize them so that the leakage is not really a factor from listener to listener. We're trying to deliver the same sound to every person so that we get consistent test results, and we're controlling one of the big variables in headphones, which is bass and leakage. So we went to 4 different countries. Most of these, with the exception of Canada, we have Harman locations in the United States, China, Europe, and we have a large number of trained listeners as well as untrained listeners. And we did some tests where they compared these 4 different headphones. The Harman Target Curve, which I've already described, the Sennheiser HD 800, which I think at the time was considered one of the best headphones. I think it's still very, very good today. There's nothing really, really too bad about it. And then at the time, the LCD2 was getting a lot of press, and we were actually we bought one, and it was doing fairly well in our tests as well. And then the ubiquitous Beats by Dre headphone, which marketing was convinced that there's something golden about the sound, and we should just be replicating it.
Mm-hmm.
So we took an open back headphone. This is not an expensive headphone. It's Sennheiser HD 519 or 518. The remarkable thing about this headphone is it's very consistent. We bought like 20 samples of this and tested them, and for a $119 headphone, it was remarkably consistent. We found out it was made in Ireland at their factory. So, but it's basically consistent, and because it's open back, it has a controlled leak in it, so you don't have to worry about fit so much and bass leakage. So we could just equalize it to whatever target or headphone we were trying to emulate. And the listeners went through a series of trials, and all they saw was ABCD. They would give preference ratings, go to the next trial, and it would randomize the scores.
Okay.
So here are the results. These are based on listening to 6 or 7, 8 trials. This is the average mean rating on the left for trained listeners from 4 Harman locations, and on the right are the same headphones rated by untrained listeners. And you can see that the overall trends are very similar. There's just more discrimination and consistency in the on the left-hand side with the trained listeners. So these listeners are basically in agreement what are the best headphones and which ones are the worst. And the untrained listeners are not as discriminating, but given time and a little bit of training, perhaps they would perform the same. So you can see here, HP1 it was the Harman Target, HP4 was the Beats headphone. So
there you have it.
So it's not because of marketing. We also looked at, we had people self-describe their listener ability or their training and experience. And we found that people were more trained, that the Harman trained listeners were more discriminating, so they can, spread out their ratings. They have the largest range of ratings, and they're also generally more consistent. If you look at the country, there's not really any variation. So this, there's always been this myth in audio that different countries have different tastes. That Germans like a different sound. The British like tight bass. The Americans like boomy bass, and the Japanese or the Chinese don't like as much bass. This is something I've heard consistently, and yet when I do blind tests, I don't find this to be true. The other thing, age was not really a factor either. Marketing thought maybe younger people like Beats because they like a different sound, and we'll get into that a little bit. But in this particular case, we're not really seeing that. What we're seeing is that for older listeners, HP2, which is the Sennheiser, they're rating that a little higher than younger listeners, and we think that's because it doesn't have boosted bass and it has more high frequency. So the relative balance is more skewed towards the high end, and perhaps this is compensating for some age-related hearing loss. So while we were making a tour of the world, we also designed this app where they could move these knobs and adjust the bass and the treble to something that they preferred. And they could do this over a range of 20 dB in the bass and quarter dB increments, or 15 dB in the treble. So these are very broad bass shelving filters, very, very broad treble filter. And they would do a total of 5 repeats with 3 different pieces of music. And we'd always randomly start the level of the bass and the treble so that they would have to adjust it to what they liked. And this is with the headphone tuned to the flat in-room curve. So if you imagine how a speaker would sound, you'd probably want to turn the bass up and turn the treble down. And that's exactly what they did. They turned the bass up a little more than what we typically see with a loudspeaker. They turned it up to 6.4 dB, and they turned the treble down, about the same, 1.4 dB. But you have to keep in mind this included both trained and untrained listeners.
Mm-hmm.
We also found that it depends on the music and the recording, because we know recordings are not mixed under the same conditions, different monitors, different rooms, different mixing engineers, different hearing loss perhaps. But we found that about a 1 to 2 dB difference in the bass.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer Warnes is JW, Steely Dan is SD, and ES, I think, was Kanye West with it's a song that he sings. It's a duet that he sings with a woman whose name I forget. Estrelle, or I think is her name.
Estrelle. Or Estelle. I can't remember.
Estelle,
Yeah. Yeah.
American Boy, I think that's the song.
That's right.
We found this gender difference. We found that females preferred less bass, a dB less bass than males, and they preferred almost 2 dB less treble than males. So we don't know if this is real in the sense that the sample of females is relatively small. It's always hard to find females when you go into an engineering company. There's a disproportionate amount of males. But so this needs, I think, some follow-up study. It could be that the females have better hearing, perhaps. They don't need as much treble. It could be that females in general have different shape, different volume ear canals. I think that could be a factor for in-ear headphones. So they're going to hear a little more bass with a smaller volume. And in this case, this was an open back, so that probably wasn't an issue. But it's something that's interesting, and I think needs some further study.
Mm-hmm.
Not much variance across different countries. And age, this was perhaps interesting. This gets back to the marketing question, whether younger, listeners prefer more bass. And in general, that's what we found. As the age went up, people preferred less bass, and about the same amount of treble until we get to about 55, 56, and then they're turning down the bass down 2 dB and cranking up the treble another 2 dB. So we don't know for sure if this is hearing loss related, but that would be a good guess.
Yeah.
And then experience, people that are young and inexperienced tend to turn the bass up and the treble up a little more than someone who's been trained. That's been one of the complaints about some people don't like Harman because it has too much bass, and they say you should have only included trained listeners, but the point is we don't sell headphones just to trained listeners. So I think this can be addressed with a simple tone control.
I was reading some of the criticism prior to this interview, and it said it focuses on average listeners and not audiophiles. And I was almost like, well, what's your point? That's kind of what a brand like Harman needs to do.
Yeah. And so, so far, apart from bass and small differences in treble, I mean, whether you're trained or audiophile, you don't like resonances, you like something smooth and extended.
Mm-hmm.
And what you like, I think, can be addressed with a bass and a treble filter.
Mm-hmm.
And with active headphones, that's totally doable. Pretty well, every phone, every active headphone comes with an app which you can adjust.
Right.
So here we get into this was a study where we'd done listening tests on over-ear headphones, 31 different models with 130 people. And I analyzed the data using a method called cluster analysis, where you look at similarities between how people rate things. And the question was, are there clusters of people or different segments based on what they like? And could there be any demographic factors associated with what they like? So if we looked at these 31 headphones and how they rated them, and we found that there were basically three segments, and the largest one was 64% of the listeners, and then we had the next largest one was 22%, and then we had a small segment of 15%, and this is all based on what headphones they tend to prefer. So the way I did this, I looked at the 5 most and the 5 least preferred headphones in each of these classes. And we look at what the average headphone that they like based on the top 5, how does it deviate from the Harman target? And you can calculate the difference and express it as an error curve, which is that red curve. So if they like the Harman target on average, which the 64% segment is generally like the Harman target, the error curve would be flat. If they like something with more bass, the error curve would have some boosted bass. If they like something with less bass, the error curve would be falling off, as you can see in this case, this example. So the biggest class 1, generally liked the Harman target as it was, perhaps a little less bass on average, below 40 or 50 hertz. We had the second class 2. This is 15% of the listeners. They liked something with 4 to 6 dB more bass. And then we had a third class, which represented 22%, and they liked about 2 dB less bass and perhaps a little less treble. So, and then we looked at the profiles of these classes, and the biggest class generally included all categories based on gender, training, age groups, although there were fewer over 50 years old. The 15% class 2, these tended to be male, younger listeners, and they liked headphones with more bass than the Harman target and 1 dB more treble. And then class 3 tended to be untrained listeners, a disproportionate number of females and people over 50. So again, we see this tendency of age and females liking less bass, and mostly defined by less bass. So the next thing, we wanted to know whether we could just look at deviations from the Harman target and predict how it would score in a blind listening test. So it's a very simple model. It just looks at different statistics for calculating these deviations, but you can just look at the headphones that scored very high, from 90 to 100% on the preference scale, tended to deviate less than as you get down to a poor headphone, which tends to deviate largely both in the bass as well as the treble. So I just looked at the standard deviation of that red curve. So the more it deviates from 0 dB, the higher the standard deviation. And then I calculated the slope of that curve, the absolute value of that slope. So if it's very close to 0, the slope will be 0. If it tends to be boosted in the bass, it'll have a a negative slope, and it'll have a positive slope if it's going up like this. But it doesn't matter whether it's going up or down. It's the absolute value that matters. So it turned out, just using those two metrics, I could predict the scores of these 31 headphones with a correlation of about 86. And the root mean square error, which is about 6.7 of a rating on a 100-point scale. So anything within 6.7 of a rating is statistically tied.
Mm-hmm.
But not too bad that you can get 86% close to a score in a test. So that's basically the target, the science behind it. It's based on simulated headphones, but there's always caveats, and because it's become very discussed a lot in the popular audiophile press and headphone enthusiasts, there's been a lot of misinterpretations. So these are some of the caveats. You can have similar scores and the headphones can sound quite different because it may have a deviation at a different part of the frequency band, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out that these broadband deviations and spectral tilts are more audible than narrowband deviations. That's not surprising to me because Floyd Toole and I did a lot of work back in the 90s, late 80s, measuring the thresholds of resonances, and we found that very broadband, low Q resonances are much more audible than high, larger, narrow Q resonances. Statistically, they're going to get excited more often, and a fraction of a dB over a broadband is quite audible.
Mm.
Which is one of the reasons why you pay attention to the broadband low Q stuff. The other thing I pointed out is the accuracy of the predictions. It's got a 6.7 rating error, so you have to keep that in mind. None of this considered nonlinear distortion or immersion. So we did a little bit of work with Steve Temmie at Listen on nonlinear distortion, and we found that it has to be quite high before people start to complain. So in our opinion, it's the frequency response that matters most. But you can't discount. You still have to measure it, and if it's high, then you have to do a listening test.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is I've already shown that there's different classes based on taste. So this model is based on an average. The class 1 listener, it doesn't account for people who like more bass or less bass or more treble. And so it's only a guideline or a reference, but and that's really its purpose, is to provide a reference. So when people are measuring headphones, they have something to compare it to that's been based on a lot of research.
Okay. All right. So I guess is it something that you might include in future products, or maybe you're already doing it? You mentioned the app settings to add some filters to things, and if you have all these predetermined classes of users, would that be like a preference setting that you're offering?
Exactly. So the Mark Levinson 5909 was a headphone that came out a year and a half ago, and the app doesn't have a lot of adjustment except 3 bass settings, and the default is class 1. There's another default that boosts the bass, and that's class 3, and I guess the other one removes some bass, 2 dB bass. So that's an example of a product that addresses that specifically. We also have a technology we call Personify, where it's in a JBL TWS headphone, and it's basically an app that you put in your age, your gender, and your listener training, and it will look at these curves that we, based on the research, it'll adjust the bass for the treble shelf depending on what demographic you fall into.
And I suppose with the app, you could even you start to define with feedback from the apps as to what people by their age group are ending up preferring as well, to create even a larger untrained data pool to draw information from.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's really interests me, is gathering data from people. I don't I know other companies are doing this now. It's not something that we've really taken seriously, but I think there's a huge potential there if you can capture that.
Cool.
Couple of questions, if you don't mind. So one, maybe worth just emphasizing why it is a curve, why it's not just a flat line.
Yeah, that's a question that people used to looking at loudspeaker curves. That's the first question they ask, and the reason is the bass is there because if you were to compare it to a loudspeaker in a room, you would see a bass. But the big difference is you see this big bump at 3 kilohertz, and that's the ear canal resonance in the ear simulator. So it's adding that resonance to simulate the ear canal resonance in my ear and, well, in everyone's ear. So it's supposed to be there. If you took a measurement at the blocked ear, that you wouldn't be measuring. If you put the microphone at a blocked ear, then that resonance would be greatly reduced. You would see a bit of the contra resonance, but because we want to include the ear canal in the measurement, you see that big peak at 3K.
Yeah, I think back, just in the beginning, you mentioned the starting point was effectively calibrating that coupler resonance out of it. So you took a kind of ideal speaker and measured through the coupler. Said, okay, well, this is the starting point of what should be the reference. Is that
that's right.
Yeah, and then you apply a next layer, which is to make adjustments in low frequency, high frequency output. But that underlying shape is actually remains the same, let's say.
Yeah, it's the bass, the shelf changes a little bit because it's a broad shelving filter. I don't know, it's around 1.5 kilohertz. It doesn't change, it just moves it up or down a little bit, but the basic shape remains the same.
Yeah. So the key point actually is not just accounting for the different measurement conditions, i.e. a loudspeaker and a cope room, flat line, headphone with a ear canal simulator. You'll have some kind of a curve with resonance in it. The point is actually to determine this user preference in terms of balance, let's say.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, in the last year or so, there's been this trend, and I talked about it at CamJam, where people are normalizing everything to the diffuse field response of the test fixture.
Right.
So instead of having a big, they'll basically subtract out the test fixture and normalize it to a diffuse field response, or if you're looking at loudspeakers, it would look like the in-room response of the loudspeaker, which is sort of a downward slope line, roughly 8 dB from 20 hertz to 20K. And that removes this ear canal resonance, but it's still not a flat line. People are used to looking at flat lines. So I prefer to actually look at it in terms of error curves. So, pick your target, whether it's diffuse field or whatever, and express the measurement as the difference. So, if it hits the target perfectly, it would be a flat line, and if it deviates, then you can see where it's deviating and whether it's too much bass, not enough bass, so on.
I was kind of curious about one thing is you have a primary resonance peak, say around 3 kilohertz, and then the Harman curve, what you target, is actually rolling off fairly steeply from that point for the rest of the frequency range. Are you able to comment on why that is? Why does that imply that the coupler is underestimating the high frequency level with increasing frequency?
Yeah, so that brings me to this. So one of the things, the coupler that we started our research, was only limited. It was really only well known and calibrated up to 8 to 10 kilohertz, which is the 711. The new standard, the 4.3 coupler, is it's based on a large study of 44 humans. They did measurements of their ear canals. I think Vince Ray did a talk on this on your channel. So it's if you compare that to, and we actually did this with our 711 coupler, you see you see differences in the bass as well as the treble. So if you take the same in-ear headphone and measure it on a 711, you'll get, on a B&K 5128, you'll get much less bass, on average about 2 to 3 dB less bass, and more treble. So if you look at the current Harman target curve, this is the old curve translated on the 5128. And if you go into a room and measure the same speakers with a 5128, you'll see more treble. So what we've been working on lately is a target curve defined for this new test fixture. And we believe it'll more accurately represent, what a human would hear sitting in the room listening to the speaker.
And if you compare circumaural headphones or insert earphones, would you not see quite a significant shift in where that resonance occurs?
Yeah, there is a difference. If you look at the old 711 coupler versus the new one, you see the input impedance is different, but you see where the resonances occur is also different. It's a larger volume ear canal. So you see differences in the bass, and that in part explains why when we went from the old coupler to the new one, you're seeing less bass. It also explains, we could never really explain why the in-ear target had 4 dB more bass than the over-ear target. And part of the explanation is that this, when you go from an open ear to a closed ear, the impedance of the ear canal plays a much more important role and interacts with the in-ear headphone. And when you take that into account, the two target curves are much closer to each other. So we're now in the process of looking at this, and I have a pretty good suspicion that the two curves may well be very similar. So we don't need to have separate target curves for different types of headphones.
Okay, irrespective of that resonance position.
Yeah, the resonance is going to shift, but and you can see that. But when you measure it, like I said, we're going to have to measure. We're going to have to test both target curves, or test one curve on different types of headphones and see whether we need to adjust it.
Excellent.
All right.
Any other questions?
Nothing from me.
I think that's good. So we can put the link for people to sign up for the AES to get access to the paper if they're really keen. But I think this is a nice preview for most people that are, whether they're hobbyists or just interested in how things are derived for creating these kind of standards. It's quite interesting.
I also, this is open access, so you can, I did a summary of most of the research up until 2018 in Acoustics Today, so they can go and read this paper for free. And then, all the AES work is available on the AES website.
Okay, good stuff. All right, so we encourage people to ask any questions down below. and like, subscribe, and share. And yeah, Sean, thanks for joining us today, and we appreciate your time. It was educational.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.